today will be the introduction to insects. And you want to, you know Seth better than I do, Evangeline. Do you want to tell about his background?
Yeah, so Seth has a pretty awesome background in entomology. He is the guy to ask if you have any bug questions. I know I've had people in Bradley County bring to me different bugs and pests that need identification. And if there's ever one that I'm stumped on or that I could use some verification on just to clarify, he hands down has never not known right off the bat. So he has a passion for entomology and strong background in it. And Tom, he graduated from the University of Georgia, correct?
Yes, I think so.
So he has his master's from the University of Georgia, and yeah, he's the guy.
Here we go.
We're going to be talking about insect anatomy, identification a little bit, beneficial insects, and a little bit of IPM here too. So I like this here picture on the left, A Bug's Guide to Garden Pests. And, you know, number one is the gardener, you know, so we need to be using every single tool we have in the toolbox to, you know, combat some of these pests that we have in our gardens. And our guidebook looks like this. If you can see my picture here, is chapter 13 from our bug guide. It's a fantastic chapter. It's my favorite chapter in the book. And so, you know, using every tool we have here. So with that, at the very end of this, I'll also share a few resources on that chat, maybe with a few links, some of the resources that you guys can use at your fingertips and at your disposal right there, and you know, some different publications to help you identify insects. Anybody know what this looks like right here? They might have seen it in a museum of some sort. It's a
trilobite.
Yeah, good job. Whoever answered that. It's a trilobite. So unfortunately, these beautiful trilobites are, but they carry on because arthropods are certainly not extinct and they are thriving. So this is an ancient arthropods, and you know, insects and arthropods, you know, they've evolved over the past 412 million years. So this planet far longer than we have. And so I like this image here. It's a fossil of a dragonfly. And so this dragonfly probably has a wingspan of about 3 feet. So during that period, it had enriched oxygen levels. And, you know, this dragonfly was enormous, the size of my, you know, half the size of me. So can you imagine some of the bugs we have in our gardens? If this were the case back then. So I always like to bring that up. At least our insects are small. So we're looking at the whole lineage of the animal kingdom here. And if you focus, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse here. We're focusing on the arthropods. And we break it down. You can see there's lots of different types of arthropods. And for this presentation, we're going to be focusing mostly on the insects. But I always like to cover, you know, all the arthropods and, you know, just showing the appreciation for how diverse these insects really are. You know, showing the different time periods when they may have evolved and emerged. And, you know, see how flies are the latest to evolve. And certainly see that aspect on that divergence. So with the arthropoda, there's 6 different classes. We got the crustacea, chilopoda, diplopoda, symphyla, arachnida, and the insects. And so with crustacea, every time you guys go out and, you know, eat at Calhoun's or, you know, some other restaurant, what's it called, Chesapeake's, you guys will be eating some arthropod that is related to insects, right? So I always like that appreciation. Crustacea, you know, include arthropods, and, you know, they're called decapods. They have the 5+ pair of legs, and pill bugs are related to that. So a little appreciation there. Just want to go through some more arthropods here. We got centipedes, millipedes, and garden centipedes. You know, some of these I see a lot of times on our hikes, and Not calling them insects, not calling them spiders. They got their own little designation or class, so to speak. And Arachnida. And so Arachnida, one of my personal favorites, just because of the diversity and how much they contribute to our garden. There's a lot of beneficial aspects that come out of spiders here with eating our pests. And so, not to mention, they can be kind of funky looking too. So we have the peacock spider here on the bottom right. It actually does a little peacock mating dance. And then the smiley face spider here, that's actually native to Hawaii. They come in all different shapes and sizes. And unfortunately, this does include the tick family too. So those are, examples of Arachnida. But what we want to focus on today is Insecta. So this is all our talk today is on insects. Just like I like to tell our 4-H kiddos in school and everything, they have 3 body parts, just like a snowman, the head, thorax, and abdomen. And here on the bottom left is an example of one of the pests that we're going to be talking about today as well. If anybody might know this little sucker that might be in our garden coming up later in July and August. But we'll be talking about that guy. And so another few identification points here. Unlike spiders, spiders have 2 body parts. Insects have 3 body parts. We got 6 legs, a pair of antennae. Spiders do not have antennae, and some other identification parts here. And I'm not asking you guys to know all of these, but as master gardeners, you certainly are going to know number 32, and that's the mouth parts. And truly, when it comes down to insect identification, we're all out there looking at our plants as often as we can out in our garden, maybe more times now in this spring than ever. But we're looking at what damage is caused on these plants. So that's when the mouth parts truly become an important factor. We're going to talk about different mouth parts and the damage that you'll see on the plants. And so a little side note, a little tangent. My pet peeve is when there's a animation character, that's teaching kids about, insects and everything, and they don't put it anatomically correct, right? So here we see there's only 4 legs. And of course, we just talked about it. Insects are supposed to have 6 legs, right? So, but at least he has the antenna and whatnot too. But and he's wearing shoes and all. But a little pet peeve, especially I usually have a little stuffed animal bee here. I like to show around too, and just get people thinking, what actually defines an insect. So, anywho, we'll move on and talk a little bit more about how insects grow and develop. And here we have a prime example of a monarch butterfly going through its metamorphosis stages here. And so I love this little meme right here, this little comic. There's a little police insect. Excuse me, have you by any chance seen this bug? And it's a little caterpillar guy. And the butterfly that was probably that little caterpillar went through metamorphosis and does not know what the officer is talking about. So I like that because most of the time it is caterpillars that are chewing on our plants in our garden too. So that's a fun little comic here. So there's 2 types of metamorphosis. The first one's complete metamorphosis, and they're going through that complete stage from egg to larvae all the way to the pupa. A lot of people call that pupa the chrysalis. If it's a beautiful butterfly, we call it that as well. But just for our terms, we'll just be calling it the pupa as right there. So that's complete metamorphosis, and that's something that all butterflies, beetles. So maybe you've seen those little larvae in the ground. They're eventually going to pupate and go through that complete metamorphosis stage before they're an adult. Flies undergo this and fleas as well. So I'm sure if any of you guys have cats or dogs at home, you're probably learning a little bit about the life stages of those fleas as well. So usually you want to bomb those when they're at their vulnerable larval or egg stage. Other metamorphosis is incomplete metamorphosis. So the prime example here is a grasshopper, right? So, the egg turns into, almost a baby adult, what we call a nymph. and that nymph is going to go and molt through different stages. So it never actually pupates. It actually, just, I guess, effectively gets larger. And many times that nymph at that first or second or third stage will not even have wings at that stage. So usually only until they're an adult is when they can actually start to fly and actually have wings and form those. So grasshoppers, cockroaches, and of course our true bugs. So when I say true bugs, that could be, an aphid. An aphid is an example of a true bug. And so we'll be talking about that as well. So aphids actually are unique in that they undergo parthenogenesis. And so parthenogenesis, effectively, a lot of times, I can only imagine if humans underwent this, but they can develop into a new insect without, fertilizing an egg. And oftentimes during parthenogenesis, that baby can be already ready to produce more babies once it's in the womb of the mother as well. So, a lot of times when we're out in our garden and we'll see some aphids around, those aphids can replicate. One day you only see a few aphids. The next day, it seems like there's hundreds on your plant. And how they undergo that process and exponentially increase is through parthenogenesis, where they don't actually have to mate and go through that whole stage. So I can only imagine our human population if we did parthenogenesis. I always like to joke about that. So why do we even care about bugs? And I'm just going to go through here. A lot of times is people, have a bad stigma against bugs, and that's totally fine too. So that's a lot of the reason why we study them. Sometimes we have aesthetic pleasure from them. There's butterfly gardens, and of course, pollination services. That's a big hot topic right now, and it's something that our world is definitely trying to promote. More native bees in our area. And so going through here, we got the beneficial components that go into why we care about bugs. And they even contribute to decomposition in the soil, aeration of the soil. One big thing I like to talk about is biocontrol. So that's effectively where one insect eats another insect. Medical as well. Aesthetic value, love a good butterfly. If you've never been to a butterfly garden or a butterfly museum, it's a magical time. And then, of course, the injuries that they can undergo, from forestry to gardening to row crops, disease vectors, transmitting those between, actually diseases in our garden as well, stored foods. The list goes on as to why we care about insects and why we need to understand them in order to effectively control them. So going back into the mouth parts, we're going back full circle into why we wanted to know about the mouth parts for these insects, is because they're all going to cause different types of injuries to that plant. So when we're out there in the garden, we're scouting for these plant injuries, and oftentimes it may occur as a chewing on the leaf. It could be a sucking or like a piercing into the leaf. So you'll see little dots on the leaf, and we'll see that here in a minute. Internal feeding, maybe they're feeding from the ground. Galls, so maybe the plant is in response stress, so it's going to be producing galls saying, hey, there's an insect on me. It's telling the master gardener, hey, we got insects here. Subterranean, maybe we have a root feeding white grub of some sort. Egg laying, back to that subterranean one, the Japanese beetle is one that comes to mind big time, as far as, maybe from the lawn to our garden, it's chewing down at the root of our plants. And then, of course, egg laying as well. So we talked about diseases. So a little bit of examples of these injuries for chewing. And so here at the bottom right is an example of a Japanese beetle that actually shows chewing damage. So oftentimes when we're out in the garden, we don't see these insects firsthand, right? We often, have to play a little Sherlock Holmes and see what damage is actually caused by these insects. So maybe you're out there and looking at your plants and you're seeing holes, missing from your plants. And perfect example down the bottom right of a Japanese beetle damage. So if you see that, you know you have a chewing insect, and that can help you narrow down what insect and what we need to control it with. A little bit more example here is a fall armyworm. So here on the bottom left, again, I don't know if you can see my mouse. Maybe this is nothing. Maybe I can do a pointer here. Let's see. Let's see. You guys see when I draw here? All right, we're learning stuff. All right, so right here, there's a Y on the head of the fall armyworm, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool that you can identify the fall armyworm that way. But the real reason how I was able to identify this, we didn't find this until days later, was we actually was seeing these window panes on the corn itself, and you can see these little clear, transparent areas where that insect had chewed on. So this is something that we got. We figured out what host it was. It was the corn, right? We saw what damage it was on, and we figured out what insect and how to control it. And so that's just a prime example of where you can see what damage is caused on the plant, and you can narrow it down to what insect. All right. So again, sucking damage. So this is a good example where an insect might have a piercing mouth part. So it's actually poking directly into the plant. And so what that'll look like, dots here, prime example of that. Rasping damage, so they're actually clawing. This is a thrips. And so these thrips are actually clawing and damaging the plants from their mouth parts. And so that'll kind of look like on flowers, some damage here, almost disease looking. Internal feeding, so maybe they have larvae that's actually climbing inside of these thicker leaves. And we get a little bit closer here, and you can see it's kind of bulging out here. And so that's you can open that leaf up, and you actually have internal feeding as well. A lot of times this is on ornamental plants here. So let's see. Another internal feeding example there. Leaf galls. So this is a red maple here, and this is a good example of a plant's response telling you that there's an insect that's feeding on it. And a lot of times this is caused by a parasitic wasp that's actually, feeding inside and producing these galls. So it can actually, if you look at that gall a little bit larger, it actually has a parasitic wasp in there as well. So a lot of times you can open up these galls and there might even be an insect in there. So what that is just irregular plant growth, nothing that the insect created. Which is a pretty cool relationship there between plants and the insects. Getting down a little bit more about injury. This is a good example. We'll see this a lot in late summer, early fall. And there's these loud noises that you'll hear in the forest. And you'll see these egg-laying injuries there at the bottom right here. And so what that is just the cicada. It's drilling its eggs in the bottom of it and scarring the bottom of those branches. And we all love cicadas, but they do cause damage occasionally, especially in those years where they're overlapping their generations too. So, of course, we have the yearly cicadas that come out every year, but it's pretty cool to also note there are cicadas out there that do the 13 years and the 17 years. So they're actually prime numbers, so they won't overlap very much. I think that's a pretty cool thing there. I got something here in the chat. What type of tree is that? So cicadas aren't really host specific as to what tree. I've seen it on apple trees and peach trees. So really they're not terribly specific. So I'm sorry I can't answer that perfectly there, but excellent. I'm glad stuff is coming into the chat here. So keep sending that chat off. Looking here at the soil, we talked about complete metamorphosis and how we have the larvae that can occur in the soil. So a lot of times if you guys are double digging your garden, or you're getting deep into your soil, or maybe you're doing a soil test and send that off to Jessica and you had to get some soil, but you found a white grub. Remember, all beetles have that white grub stage But there's one particular white grub that we need to keep an eye out for, and that's the Japanese beetle here. And so that'll actually chew the bottom of fescue and the bottom of our grass and our turf and our lawns. And so again, they can come into our garden as well and disturb that. So we want to hit them at their most susceptible life stage and hitting them before they're able to lay their eggs here. Because once we lay their eggs, we're just revenge trying to kill them down as best we can, but we need to hit them at this stage before they can bring it to the next generation. So a lot of times we see them when they're adults at July, but spraying them at that point isn't really the best course of action. So we'll talk a little bit about IPM here at the end too. So, and that last one is insect vector plant diseases. So what I mean by this is this plant here, this poor plant was fed on by an insect. And while it was being fed on, it transmitted diseases into that plant. So oftentimes that's transmitted by aphids. So they're actually going from plant to plant, poking their straw mouth part into that plant and inadvertently going to be transferring diseases between plants. Good example here. This is a really close up of an aphid. You can always identify an aphid based off its cornicles here. It's kind of like little cool antenna off of the aphid's butt. So I think aphids are pretty cool looking right there. And they actually release a honeydew substance excrement off of that as well. So another example of it, mouth parts there piercing into the plant, vectoring those diseases. You might have your flowers out there and they're starting to get diseases. And you might think, hey, I might need to spray a fungicide of some sort. But really, a lot of times, these diseases are actually spread by mites. So air-fitted mites, this is a prime example where you might never see this. I mean, it's a tiny looking air-fitted mite here. So just examples where diseases, we might think are just fungal diseases, but a lot of times they are transmitted viruses from plants, from insects. So that was a little bit about damage, and we're working up to why we're talking about this. And we need to still lay down a foundation of getting some insect ID down. But I know I've been rambling for a good minute here. I just want to pause for a second, everyone collect their thoughts. Insect orders, we're going to break it down a little bit more. And so what I mean by orders is this is how they're identified in their groups here. So, we were talking about true bugs. And here we have just a prime example of a stink bug that's in the order Hemiptera. All beetles are Coleoptera. Butterflies and moths, Lepidoptera. And of course, the list goes on of important orders from flies, fleas, and other Theraptera as well. So I like to show this just to put it all into perspective. These numbers are ever changing here, but the most diverse type of insect order are beetles, that Coleoptera right here with, this number is probably upwards of 400,000 right now, if you look at the different literature. But what this means is there are 350,000 different types of beetles. So these are species. A good example, Hymenoptera, wasps, bees, ants, 108,000. And to put this into perspective, do you all want to take a stab as to how many thousands of species of plants there are that have been discovered? Does anyone want to throw a number out there? Let's hear a number. It can be, 100,000. Good guess. That was a really good guess. Yeah. So what this is, I'll see if I can throw this up here. This is a little chart as to if all the species were put up in a pie chart here, you can see that insects take up well over the majority here. And so plants, you're right. It is about 125,000 right now. So that's much less than the beetles that we're sitting at. So, give it to your entomologist with all their identification. And there's a lot more bugs to go around than plants currently. So I think that's pretty cool. And not to mention there's just more beetles than there are plants described. So I think that's pretty neat there as well. So let's get talking about beetles. Anybody know who this iconic figure is here? Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin really was the founder for the beetle diversity, and had theories before anyone. He's the man of the origin of species. So really got into diversity, and beetles were actually one of the things that got him interested in the origin of species and the diversity. A lot of times examples are shown of the finches on Galapagos Islands, but he had a really nice beetle collection as well. And oftentimes, those beetles that he collected then are still being identified to this day. Yeah, it is pretty cool to think about. So, I encourage you guys to kind of look at beetle diversity there. And I even have a cool little collection of beetles myself. And you'd be kind of shocked as to how many nerds there are that go around and trade different species of beetles to get their collection up. So it's pretty fun stuff. So we'll be talking about Beatles here. One of the all-time best-selling albums here, Abbey Road. Got to get that in there. And I guarantee you, we're starting to run out of names. I guarantee you there's an Abbey Road beetle out there somewhere. So beetles, they're beautiful. Lots of different types of them. And how we can identify them is based on their elytra. So that elytra are actually just a hard cover. If you can see my laser pointer here, I'm kind of pointing at the front wings. And so those are called the elytra, and it's a hard plate cover. So a lot of times people will see a beetle thinking, they don't have any wings, but that's actually their wing right there. That covers it up. So looking at this lady beetle right here, that's its elytra, that hard front wing cover. And going back to their mouth parts, they're generally for chewing. So whether they're chewing on another insect or chewing on a plant, they're going to be doing chewing mouthing parts. So a good identification for your plants there. And one of those chewing ones is the Japanese beetle. And so you can see it is absolutely chewing its way through this crop here. And so what it does is it lays its eggs in oftentimes turf grass soil. So a lot of times if master gardeners are renovating a area to put a raised bed in or to put in a garden plot or food plot in, you got to be careful if you're changing it from a turf grass area to a garden area, because you're most likely going to have, those Japanese beetle eggs under that soil that are just going to come up and, start munching on your garden as well. So, and they feed when they're adults too. I know you guys probably see this every year, and you just got to pick them off. And a lot of times we can beat them and by spraying them before they emerge. Talking about that. For example, you're going out and you're looking at your trees, and you might be noticing some dieback of the branches, maybe limbs falling off. You look here and you see exit holes, and this is a D-shaped exit hole. So it looks like this D is facing up right here. A lot of times that's a perfect indication that you might have yourself a flathead borer in your trees here. And so a prime example is the peach tree borer. And I don't know why they call it flathead, because it's got a big old head right there. So it'll actually drill in and really damage a lot of our ornamental plants and trees in our landscape as well. So as master gardeners, I know a lot of times you guys might be handling not just garden situations, but also ornamental too. So something to keep on the lookout as well. And so I've been called out to multiple farm visits on what these holes are, and a lot of times it's just a woodpecker going in trying to get one of those flathead borers, and you'll see an array of dots going between, and that's that woodpecker actually trying to dig out some of those flathead or other borers. And so we have tons of different types of borers. One of them is the emerald ash borer, actually, and that was taken out in just about all of our Tennessee ash trees here in the state. So, and another example of why we're trying to prevent folks from carrying firewood over a 50-mile radius, because a lot of times that's how these pests are, transferred and moved across the state. So, all goes back into that science right there. So, bugs now. So we talked about the elytra there on the beetles, and you'll notice a similar feature here on the bugs when we're talking about Hemiptera. And so you'll see a similar structure on the beetles, but this one isn't complete. You have a little membrane here at the end. And again, this is its front wing, and this is what we call a hemielytra. So it's a half of an elytra, really. And so it'll have that membrane here at the end, and a huge shield here. And that's what we'll call a scutellum that comes down right here. And this scutellum is V-shaped right here, pretty big. So a very good way to identify between a beetle and a bug is also the mouth parts. So a lot of times they're, sap suckers. So they're going to have that piercing straw-like mouth part. And so what we'll call a beak or a straw. Some examples, we talked about aphids. Cicadas are in that group, leafhoppers. And we'll show a few other examples here. And so not all of them are bad. There's some good ones too. So just trying to get the foundation here. Another example right there of it folded down. And then there's that triangle scutellum that comes up. Almost like a shark tooth look. And there's that membrane again that comes across. So that's a hemielytra. And you'll see that membrane almost looks like a thumbprint got put on there. And then that beak that can actually fit into a groove under his neck, I guess is what we'll call it. So there's actually a groove that fits that beak in there. So I think that's pretty neat too. But and that's what makes it adapt to be able to suck plant juices and maybe even suck some insects. So this little orange one right here is exactly what that is a box elder bug. And a lot of times we'll see that around household structures. Very minimal damage. They're not attracted to your garden. A lot of times what they're really looking to do is overwinter in your home. So a lot of times they're just a pet for household structures. Another example is, lady beetles are getting in our home as well. That might be considered a pest. But when they're in our garden, we love them. They're not a pest in our garden. So we want to promote them in our garden too. So an example of a bug that, really does do a lot of damage is the squash bug. And so you'll see a lot of these congregate together, and that egg cluster will hatch at the same time. And these things can wipe out any of your cucurbits, cucumber. You got to keep an eye out when you're planting any of those and rotating between them, because they can certainly devastate. And again, these are going to be sucking your cucumbers or your squash. And so that's, again, going to transmit the diseases. Something to keep an eye out there for. We talked about cicadas, and a little bit more bug talk right here is our scales. And so these scale insects, they're kind of, alien looking in the fact that, they're just, a lot of times they're immobile. So, they'll actually be, living here the rest of their life, so a lot of times scales mate, the males will fly off and find the female that's actually immobile. All scale insects, but a lot of them. So aphids actually produce this sweet substance off of their cornicles. A lot of times here's that example where it's coming off their cornicles right here. And so that sugar substance is going to be sticking to the leaves. And here is a great example of a tulip poplar leaf right here. And actually this black substance it is called sooty mold. And what this is it's not detrimental to the plants. It's just spores that are traveling across the environment that are actually sticking to this plant. So otherwise they would not stick to that plant if it weren't for the aphid. What I have on the tree is it won't be able to take in as much sunlight with that black substance on its leaves. And so a lot of times when you're walking down the street, maybe on a sidewalk, you'll see it hasn't rained for a while, and you'll look on this sidewalk and it's wet under there. And that's because there's an aphid feeding on this tree, and that sap is actually falling, or honeydew is actually falling down. Just more knowledge for you guys to take home next time you're walking down the sidewalk. So this is a cool little tangent as well. There's actually ants that farm aphids. So these ants shelter and take care of these aphids because they know that they produce a sugar substance off of their cornicles. Like I would like to say, give me some sugar, baby. This is a pretty funny picture because there's, again, my pet it's, not anatomically correct. This sugar substance is coming out of the wrong orifice completely. It's actually supposed to be coming out of the cornicle. So this picture I shouldn't even put in here. So I think that's pretty cool. So a little bit about scale insects. To me, I'm an entomologist, and these still just look like little boogers. But they're the most destructive group of insects that can attack our ornamental plants. And so just for our master gardener knowledge here, and my own knowledge, I identify them based off armored scale or soft scale. And so the big difference between is one produces that honeydew and one doesn't produce that honeydew. So we'll get into it, but what that scale insect, how it looks like this, is it actually has this cover right here. And so if we look back at this, that's that cover that's actually covering the insect itself as like a shield, almost like a turtle shield right here. But if we look up closer, it still has all three body parts, the head, the thorax, the abdomen. But again, it has that beak, that straw-like sucking substance. And that's how it's going to be, a lot of times vectoring a lot of diseases for our plants is that sucking motion right there. So armored scales, they're not going to produce any honeydew production. So we don't have to worry about sooty mold. So a lot of times you won't see that black substance on a tree. So no sooty mold there. Good example of that is unanimous scale. So if you guys have any of these in the environment at your house or in a neighborhood, you're probably going to have this scale on that bush right there. So, be looking out for that. And a lot of times how these scales are named is the plant, and then you just put scale after it. So, easy identification, I guess, there. So prime example, it's covered there in scales. That's what those insects are right there. And again, no sooty mold is produced by those armored scales. Now, soft scales. Little different in that they do produce that honeydew. So this specific one is a Lecanum scale right here. So a little bit example that you might be able to look up there. Prime example is a sooty mold that you can see on. So even though you can't see the scales directly on that bark, you can certainly see the sooty mold is built right there. It's making that armored substance for itself or soft substance over it and going through that metamorphosis. So it's a little bit different than the insects that we usually talk about, but yes, it does go through that metamorphosis. And so a lot of times how we fix this is by spraying dormant oil. So I don't know, has anyone ever used dormant oil out in their ornamental landscape or anything? Very safe, 3-in-1 fungicide kind of deal. And so it's a great example of something you could help to control the scale problem. Lepidoptera. So this is anything from butterflies to moths. There's some beautiful ones, and then there's some downright ugly ones. And so, again, we're talking about their mouth parts. It's the one thing I want you guys to take home here is the mouth parts of all these insects. And so what this has, instead of a sucking mouth part like a straw, like a beak, it's going to have this thing called a proboscis. So it's like a fruit roll-up straw kind of deal. So it's actually rolling up in that mouth part. That's something that they might be using for nectar or sucking something out of a plant. But now be careful here, because when we're looking at their larvae as a caterpillar, a lot of times they have chewing mouth parts. So that damage is going to be completely different. Okay, so a lot of times these butterflies or moths might be damaging as larvae, but when they're adult actual moths and butterflies, they're not going to be very much damaging. So that's why we need to make sure we attack them and control them at that stage when they're larvae. And so a good example of that is the bagworm. This is one of my most popular calls I get in the spring. And I guarantee you in the next few weeks, we're going to be getting a lot of calls about this. And so you'll just look up at some of your evergreens. These are fantastic hedgerows a lot of times that people use in neighborhoods and in landscape areas. And you'll see just whole areas wiped out from these bagworms that are defoliating the leaves. And so the bagworm actually develops. So the bagworm actually, in a good example right there, develops from its pupa. So what this is here is its pupa. And so you can see it's actually using those dead leaves or needles from that evergreen into its substance. And again, it's going through metamorphosis, and it develops into this scary looking It just looks scary moth kind of guy. But this is a great example where, we want to hit this stage. If we're killing them at this stage, we're too late. So we want to make sure we spray them early and often in the spring when we can prevent them. But if you're like me and might be a little cheap and you don't want to go out and spray all the time for these guys, especially if you can't reach up at the very tall areas, a lot of times you can just pluck these off. And so where is the egg? So a lot of times that egg is laid on that tree. Once it hatches, that larva is then going to start collecting its needles. And so those needles are then made into its pupa. So that's a great question. Where's the egg? An adult had laid it somewhere on an evergreen. It hatched, and it's starting to form its next stage during the next seasons. Good. So bagworms, pretty cool looking guys there. There's another example right there. Has 128 different host plants. So what that means is different types of evergreens, from Leland cypresses, which I am not a fan of, to even white pines and spruces. Serbian spruces can have them too. So beautiful trees there to keep an eye out for. They can come in all shapes and sizes, and very small here, or they can be very large and taking up the whole one. Almost look like cones on your plant, on your tree. Excuse me. Cool examples there as it forms. And if you collect some of these, I don't know if you guys probably have kids at home during this time period. If you collect some of these guys, you can put them in a bag and actually watch them hatch. If you keep them in a Ziploc bag, they'll start hatching. And it's a really cool process to watch, I think. May spark some future entomologists, which is pretty cool. So watch them and try to get them before they emerge in mid-May. So, now's the time to be scouting and looking for them because they're starting to come up and get larger in size. All right, eastern tent caterpillars. I get a call about this just about every year, multiple calls. And someone might see a web-like structure in their trees. A lot of times this is controlled by nature. You'll see this in their apple trees or wild cherries or any other kind of smaller shade tree kind of deal. You're probably not going to have to control them as often, but just so you're familiar with them, I want you guys to know that it's the eastern tent caterpillar, very common in our area, and it kind of makes like a cotton candy ball is kind of what it looks like. Good example of them hatching there, and you can spray for them if you'd like to. So, Hymenoptera. So this includes anything from bees and wasps to ants. And so these guys also have chewy mouth parts. And a lot of times these can be pests in our households, or even some of the population is allergic to these. Hymenoptera, they have those chewy mouth parts, and oftentimes they're probably going to be chewing on other insects because a lot of these actually do practice maternal and paternal care. So they'll kill an insect and take it to their young and chew it up for them, which is pretty cool, I think. I like to show this. This is Dr. Justin Schmidt. Dr. Justin Schmidt is a pretty cool feller in that he wrote the pretty cool book called the Insect Pain Index. So what he does for a living is he goes out and collects all these insects and actually tests how painful the stings are or the bites. So, tarantula hawk that he's got in his hand right there, I would probably be in tears if I got stung by that. But I couldn't imagine working for this guy, essentially. I mean, but if that's something you guys want to look into and read about, Dr. Justin Schmidt, it's a pretty cool read and fascinating. He describes it with full imagery. So it really feels like you're actually experiencing the pain. Little side note there. Diphthera. So these are flies, the common house fly. Here on the top right, we have a crane fly. And how we identify flies is pretty simple. Every insect has 4 wings, right? So we have 1, 2, and usually there's a larger 3rd and 4th wing there for 2 pairs of wings. But if you look here, these insects actually have halteres. So what they are they're pseudo wings. and it's almost like they're flying like a helicopter with that back rotor for stabilizing, because it really helps stabilize their flying motion. So, if you're ever confused if you got to fly or not, just look out for those halteres. And in crane flies, they're really pronounced. But if you look here on the common housefly, they can be very small and tiny where you can hardly see it. But good identification there as well. Always like to show this stat here. This is interesting. The deadliest animal in the world, coming in at number 2 is humans. So watch out for that, guys, especially with our current situation. Malaria. Malaria has caused, per year, 725,000 deaths. So, they're vectoring diseases, and it all goes down to this. Our current situation that we're dealing with right now is bats. So, bats right now would probably be in the 7,000 range right here that have vector diseases as well. So, all right. And one of the flies I spent a lot of time of my early life about was the spotted winged Drosophila. Pretty easy to identify. Here on the right, we have here on the right is a male spotted winged Drosophila. And the males can be identified based on how they're named, spotted winged Drosophila. You see those spots right there, right? Now, the real damaging gender of this species is the spotted winged Drosophila female right here on the left. And so what this is here is the ovipositor. So it's almost like a saw shape, and it's a fruit fly that can actually cut in to the fruit and insert its eggs into that fruit. Unlike any other fruit fly, the other fruit flies cannot just insert their ovipositor and lay eggs in there. But this one has a saw-like ovipositor that can really directly get in there. And so this species was introduced in the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon, Portland, Seattle, Washington area in about 2011. Shipments eventually got to the Southeast and spread rapidly. And if this map were updated, it'd probably be all across the United States. So the spotted winged Drosophila, again, is a good example of complete metamorphosis, where that egg, 350 plus eggs in a lifetime for a single individual, is laid, turns into a larva, it pupates, and then it becomes an adult. It can do that between 20 to 30 days. So, you might have 3 generations during one crop. And so what this can attack is just about every fruit in the game, from raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, strawberries. And so there's a prime example of that saw. I mean, it's serrated. That'll cut you deep in those blueberries and whatnot. And so if you ever, have blueberries at home or are just interested, you picked up some blueberries from the grocery store, if you can find any right now, and you look into that, you might see some tracheal breathing tubes coming out of the blueberry. And so that's a prime example of that egg that's breathing outside of the blueberry that was deposited from that insect. The calyx of the blueberries right here, a lot of times they'll be located around the calyx as well, a little bit easier to hide in there. And you can see a few deposits here on that blueberry. You can see it's starting to form into a larva, and it's spreading that hole there. Eventually going through that complete metamorphosis. Get real close. Sorry, this might be a little nasty for some of you guys, but it's just a blueberry, An extra protein for you if you're ever eating blueberries too. So something to think about. Just a good example there. And we'll be talking about, ways if you guys do grow small fruits at home, you can certainly spray spinosad. It's a OMRI organic certified spray. Spinosad will do a pretty good job at controlling this. But again, you got to control it at that right time. If they're adults, it's probably a little bit too late. So you gotta get them really early in their stages. Once they're in that blueberry, it's kind of a difficult game, So we have a few blueberries at our house and strawberries as well. But it hasn't been a huge problem. But those that might be growing a dozen blueberry bushes here and a few strawberry beds over here, it might be a real issue for you guys. Those growing muscadine and grapes, you guys might be a little bit more protected in that shell of that grape is a little bit more hardier. and it can't really be penetrated by that spotted wing Drosophila. That's a good example of a pest that's really, can come rampant across the southeast right there. Getting down to it, identifying insects, really takes time to, learn the different skills with identification, playing a little Sherlock Holmes, seeing what damage is out there. And it all starts with, what is the host plant? Are we dealing with cucurbits, right? What damage is on that cucurbit, on that squash right there? Is it chewing? Is it sucking? What kind of damage are we seeing? And then you can always eliminate, other pests that, might not be there. And you finally get down to, what I'm actually dealing with here. And you might even find that insect in the landscape. Got a good example of a leafhopper here, and just shows some cool diversity of a Membracidae leafhopper right here. So got pretty cool little pronotum right here. It looks like a dinosaur there. So I'm going to transition a little bit. So I like this little image here at the bottom. You got a cute little lady beetle saying he'll take an order of aphids and a side of a scale of scales. So that's on the menu for him. And hopefully, if these are in your garden and you have lady beetles out there, they can take that off for your garden as well. So we want to be promoting these beneficial insects. And so, what services are actually provided? So here we have an example of a garden. Garden looks much better than mine. No weeds in this one. But of course we have pollination, right? Always beneficial here. Again, my pet peeve, there should be 4 wings on this bee, but there's not. That's okay. Soil aeration, occasionally we have soil is a living, breathing organism here. We do have beneficials in our soil, as well as negative ones that might be eating the roots of ours as well. So keeping that in balance, right? Biological control. So a lady beetle is directly consuming and eating a pest, right? So that's what I'm going to be hitting home a lot on this little second talk is that biocontrol right there. And of course, it's always nice to be out in the garden when you have some nice, beautiful butterflies and friendly insects out in the landscape too. Good. So beneficial insects, there's 3 types right here. Predators. So we have the iconic praying mantis here eating a grasshopper. That's a direct predator right there. Parasitoids. So this is a wasp that is actually directly inserting an egg inside of this caterpillar. And that egg is then going to hatch from the inside out and come out of that caterpillar. So we've actually effectively killed this caterpillar through this parasitoid wasp, which is pretty cool right there. And then pollinators, right? So we have tons of native bees, honeybees even. And here, just a great example of how much pollen they can really accumulate on their scopa or their pollen basket on their leg right there. So those are the 3 types of beneficial insects we're going to be talking about real quick. And just keep note, all of these, again, evolved based on when these plants arise, right? So as master gardeners, you're almost like master insects, entomologists here as well, so they've evolved together. So at the origin of vascular plants, we had the pests emerge, right? That are eating these plants. Once seed plants came about, other insects evolved that could take advantage of that. Angiosperms, so any flowers that started radiating in the environment. We had pollinating services that were required with that too. So all these are a direct evolution from, what plants were provided out in nature and from each other. So with pollinators, as a beekeeper, I'm my 2nd year beekeeping right now. And so a lot of times people, always get wrapped up that they want to help the bees. But a lot of times it's not necessarily beekeeping. It's actually promoting the native bees that are already in your landscape. So there are over 4,000 species of native bees. And, a lot of people are just focusing on one bee, the honeybee. And the honeybee is actually not even native to our eastern region here. Apis mellifera is what it's called, the honeybee. And why I like to stress this is because that honeybee might only be providing a few pollination services to your garden. Whereas if we get the native bees that are incorporating in your garden, they're going to be providing a lot more pollination services. They can actually use all the flowers that you have at their disposal, instead of just the honeybees that can only focus on one or two at a time. A good example of some other honeybee here in the middle, Apis mellifera, and so that's actually a European honeybee. And then here's a great example of the different array of native bees that you might see out there, from the sweat bee to the larger mason bees. And a lot of times I've seen a lot of people are starting to get those mason bee hives that they're kind of distributing. I think that's a great, alternative to, actually being a beekeeper, because that can be a full-time job just about keeping bees. So I definitely encourage you guys to, instead of thinking about beekeeping, just encourage providing service or providing shelter for native bees. And we're going to be talking about that. Next is the parasitic wasps. So you'll probably not see these very often in the garden, but you'll see signs of the parasitoid there. And so one of the signs, though, is this aphid. This is a before, and this is an after. So that parasitoid actually parasitized the aphid, and it turned into a mummy, right? So that egg hatched out and left the exoskeleton of that aphid. So how that works is, here's that parasitoid directly putting that egg in there. This aphid is at the, oh crap moment, I'm getting parasitized here. And then it will turn into that mummy. And again, you see that where that egg hatched from that parasitoid wasp, and it hatched from that aphid. So that's great that we have that out in our garden, because we're eliminating these aphids and promoting these parasitoid wasps. And you guys didn't have to spray any insecticides. A good example there. Here's a good example. I had a tomato. This is sun sugar tomato here. Very awesome tomato. First of all, if I can recommend, if you guys are into tomato growing, very, very limited disease issue with these sun sugar tomatoes. And so I was out in the garden scouting for pests, as I usually do, and I see a tomato hornworm here, and all these little white dots on there, if everyone can see that right there. And so what that is actually parasitoid wasp eggs. And so these eggs are on that tomato hornworm, and they're going to actually utilize and eat that caterpillar to death, essentially, as barbaric as that sounds. And so what that'll turn into, it'll hatch, right? And here we go as an after. I mean, this is the same exact caterpillar species that I took a picture of here. And a few days later, this is what hatched afterwards. And so if I would have effectively killed this caterpillar, I would have killed all those parasitoids as well. So now, I've helped the parasitoid population here. So that was, a little bit about parasitoids. So predators, this is what it's all about here. You'll see these cute little lady beetles. I love watching them. They're so calm and peaceful. But when we get down to it, they have chewing mouth parts, right? So they're going to be going around eating just about everything they can see, right? So we'll go through this, a few predators to keep an eye out for. And one of those is the hoverfly. And so as a maggot, this hoverfly will actually go up to the aphid and snap its legs off and actually eat that aphid from the inside out. So, prime example of, oftentimes it's not very calm and peaceful with these predators and these beneficial insects, but it can be kind of alien sounding as to how they function and survive. Hoverflies as an adult is they kind of have that helmet eye shape there. And again, they're flies, so they'll have those halteres and those two wings. Soldier beetles, the one that I'll see most often in our state is the goldenrod soldier beetle. Names probably because they're on goldenrod a lot. And so you'll see a lot of these guys mating here on that goldenrod. And so when they're not consuming other insects like caterpillars or larvae or aphids, grasshopper eggs, they're going to be needing nectar off that goldenrod and actually needing other resources. So if we can provide them flower and nectar resources, we can help their populations and eat those bad insects. Damsel bug, We have that sucking mouth part here as well. And those guys will certainly, suck up a lot of the bad aphids and thrips as well. Praying mantis, great example of, a biological control insect. One of kids' favorites. You can, buy an eutheca. And eutheca is essentially the egg mass. And you can actually rear these as a little science experiment with the kids at home as well. And you can actually order these. And so there's 3 different types that we'll have here in Tennessee: the Carolina mantis, European mantis, and the Chinese mantis. Assassin bugs. These guys have a pretty cool wheel on their back right here. And that's a great way to be able to identify them. Assassin bugs, they're generalists in that they eat a lot of different types of insects. Example, they can be eating an adult beetle or they could be eating an aphid. So they kind of range in what they're eating. Ground beetles, this is kind of like the army support. These are boots on the ground at the bottom level of your garden, right? So a lot of times these guys will work at night, so you might not see these a lot. And so they'll be eating a lot of our snails and slugs and other maggots that might be crawling along the ground. And so one ground beetle can eat up to 50 plus caterpillars. So that's more than its body weight easily. And that's that many pests that you got out of your garden. So, ground beetles are doing a great job at controlling those. Green lacewing, these guys can be nocturnal as well, a lot of times acting at night. But their larvae here on the bottom, they have almost pincher mouth parts. They'll be eating a lot of our aphids as well. So if you see those pincher mouth parts, larvae on your plants, you got green lacewing. So that's a great note for your garden there. Lady beetles, both the adults and the larvae eat as generalists, lots of different types of pests, and they come in all shapes and sizes and dots, right? So here's an example of a larvae lady beetle. Looks very, very similar to our green lacewing larvae, right? It has that pinchers, and that's just adapted for eating those bad insects. So a lot of times the multicolored Asian lady beetle can be a pest in our homes, and that is true. But when it comes to them in our garden, I think they're still contributing to eating pests. So I would still say they're good in the garden, but bad in the house. And so a lot of people actually can get over this fact in that they will collect all their lady beetles from their house and actually store them, if your spouse lets you, in your refrigerator. And you can actually keep them alive through the winter and release them in your garden when you have a lot of pests and act as that, biological control right there. So, there's something where you can turn lemons into lemonade, right? So making them actually effective out in the garden. So something to think about. Good example of other types of lady beetles. Talked about hunting wasps. Don't recommend having a lot of these in the garden because if you're getting stung a lot, that's probably not safe for you guys in the garden. So again, these guys practice parental care and they'll, take a lot of the insects or caterpillars, chew them up and feed them to their young. So pretty cool there. Robber flies, they have a bearded appearance where they almost look like they have a beard. Let's see if I have a better picture of a robber fly. Nope. And again, these are flies, so they're only going to have those 2 wings and those halteres. And these guys are almost acting like dragonflies, coming down and swooping a lot of our adults. So this is kind of a sad one here, but we have a syrphid fly, which is actually a beneficial insect. And that robber fly is eating a syrphid fly. So, that's 2 beneficial insects eating each other. So we hate to see that, but it does happen. But most times robber flies will be eating our, bad insects and worms in the garden. My last favorite predator I love to have you guys take home as an important, most important predator are spiders. Even though they aren't insects, they're arthropods, they're arachnids. And so these guys are going to be contributing by far the largest consumption of pests. And so I actually took this picture here of an insect protecting its egg mass here next to a blueberry. And so this is an example where this insect can actually control a lot of the spotted wing Drosophila pressure that we might have in blueberries that we talked about earlier today. And the fact that spiders are so actually well adapted as predators is because they have, sit and wait hunting strategies. So, they'll build that web and they're going to sit and wait for those flies or pests to fly into their web. That's a great strategy. Their next strategy is ambushing their prey. So maybe we have this insect here or this spider here that will actually directly hunt down a lot of the pests. And the fact that they're generalists, right? So we talked about generalists and that they have very wide host range and can consume a lot of different types of pests. Love for you guys to remember spiders are very, very important in the environment. So that's my favorite predator. And again, they come in all shapes and sizes. So here we're going to wrap up real quick with some how we promote these beneficial insects. And so pollinator safety, IPM, and flowering plants. We'll jump into pollinator safety. Insect pollination is estimated at $217 billion worldwide. So that's, from the honey production to just our crop pollination, because the more pollination in our crops, the better the yields of our crop as well. So to protect these pollinators, we need to be reducing the risk. And to do that is by, lowering the toxicity. So how harmful these insecticides are. And then we want to limit the exposure. So if you recall, we talked about spray times. So if we can spray earlier or way later in the evening, then it's much, much better to protect those pollinators that might be foraging at noon, at middle of the day. Another thing is, spot spray pesticides. If you're noticing only pests on one area of your garden, it might be best to just spray that area and get direct contact there instead of spot spraying the entire garden, right? So this is great, techniques in lowering that exposure to the insect and the toxicity of how harmful those pesticides really are. There are tons of different methods as to how pollinators can pick up this spray. So if we follow this here, the bee can be just flying in its natural environment, and it creates a natural static attraction that can actually pick up a lot of our pesticide residues, right? So another method is contaminated topsoil the bee could come in contact with. And that can drift over into the runoff of our surface water when, all insects still need water for consumption, and there could be pesticides in the water. Uptake in pollen and nectar. There could be insecticide residue on that plant there. So when that insect is foraging and actually pollinating that flower, it could be taking up the insecticide that way. Even native ground bees could be taking it through the soil. I love this image in that it shows just about every way that a pollinator could take up this insecticide. And, if we can limit that exposure, we're doing the best that we can to protect our gardens and the pollinators. And so once those honeybees, if we're talking directly about honeybees, are picking up that pesticide, they're going to take it to their hive and effectively give it to the rest of the community. And that's a lot of times how our beekeepers are losing a lot of their hives too. So we just want to eliminate that risk as best we can. And another way in doing that is following IPM methods. And so what IPM is integrated pest management. And so what that does is, we're scouting for those pests and those injuries. We're identifying exactly what insect we are, so we're not spraying for the wrong insect, because some insecticides might, eliminate a certain type of pest. So we want to make sure we're getting it down to the correct one. Effective strategy on how we want to do it: attack their larval stage, right, and hitting their susceptible life stages. Let's see. Always record and observe, results of what worked and what didn't in your garden too. And so if we have a top-up or bottom-up approach to IPM, it all starts here at the bottom of the pyramid, and that's following cultural methods. And so that's with site selection. We're selecting plants that are a little bit more resilient to diseases. We're using physical and mechanical the best we can. So we're weeding, we're putting down mulch, traps, warning on some traps, like Japanese beetle traps do not work. They might actually bring more insects in. So make sure we're just doing our homework here. Biological, which is what we're talking about right now, a lot of the predators and parasitoids that we can promote out in our gardens. And then the last note there is insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides might be our last option. If we can, use horticulture oils and dormant oils and soaps first, that certainly lower the toxicity for a lot of our beneficial insects. Ground beetles do an excellent job at controlling Japanese beetles. And so ground beetles, a lot of times to promote ground beetles, we want our flower resources out there and a lot of the mulch for them as well to forage on. Because when those Japanese beetles are hatching as larvae and crawling around, we can actually have that Japanese beetle attack them at that moment too. So IPM, just to show a graph here, if we can all follow this best we can. I know we're wrapping up here at the end, but we have our little insect population, which is, here's our little guy, a little pest guy. And eventually, just like every, population, we're going to get to this number where we meet the economic threshold, right? So we, at this point, are noticing a lot of pests in our garden, and we have to make a decision on what to do about this pest population. Because if we allow it to get out of control and allow it to take over our garden, it can completely, eliminate our yields. We might not have any tomatoes that year because a lot of our pests had gotten to it. But if we can prevent it from getting to that carrying capacity or that level of population and keep pushing it down, this is effectively controlled by having beneficial insects in your garden. Because, they're going to be actually eating these and preventing them from getting to this level, right? So if we can keep that level down, we can effectively, that's the whole approach, is getting a better yield at the end of this. So just know when you're following this, though, we're not trying to eradicate every single pest, so a garden that has zero pests is probably going to have zero beneficial insects, right? And so once that zero beneficial insects happens, those pests are going to encroach and it's going to go out of control, right? So it's, again, keeping that balance. And so how we keep that balance is a lot of times by promoting an annual insectary, right? So if we can have gardens dedicated to flowering plants and having those resources available so that when there are no pests, those beneficial insects can actually consume nectar. So I'll be going through a lot of different types of flowers here for a moment as to what you can promote. And the main thing to take home is the bloom period of these flowers, right? So if we focus here on the left, those bloom periods that move from early to late. So what this means is, as soon as spring occurs, we're having a lot of flower resources available for our beneficial insects. And we want to keep that throughout our garden season, all the way into our very end of the season. So this is a great chart here provided by the Xerces Society. And Xerces Society focuses mainly on native plants. But in a moment here, I'll show you some wildflower mixtures too. So we want food nectar plants. So that could be, a lot of plants that are relatively small and open flowers. So examples can be, families from the buckwheat and the carrot families as well. And so one of those, sweet alyssum, very great in early spring, early bloom period. You can see those very, very small resources available, and that's good. That's what we want for our native pollinators. And here we have a syrphid fly. Buckwheat grows like a weed. You can throw these down, they germinate in 3 to 4 days. But be very, very careful not to plant too early because frost will take these out. And buckwheat also has additional benefits for the soil as well. So excellent weed suppressor. So has benefits for our insects and our soil. So always recommend buckwheat. Cornflower, bachelor's button. Again, we have these very small resources available. And this is a cool wildflower in that it has extra floral nectaries. So even when it's not in bloom, it can still provide nectar for our beneficial insects. So this one's just packed with nectar, and that's what we want, right? We don't want the flowers that don't have very much pollen or nectar. Cosmos, all different shapes, sizes, and colors here for what you can pick from in Cosmos, and certainly attracts a lot of our beneficials. Goldenrod, great late season flower to plant, often mistaken for producing allergies for a lot of our folks. But actually, this is not contributing to our allergies. It's actually ragweed that contributes to our allergies. So goldenrod's our friend. Ragweed is not our friend. And so we even talked about the goldenrod soldier beetle a moment ago as well. So just a great example of a easy name beneficial insect. Sunflowers, great bloom between August and September where there might not be very much resources available for our beneficials. So we want to extend that period for them. I like to go, usually we did a hands-on activity. I give you guys actually live insects here, but we'll kind of wrap up. And right here, we have a negative insect. This is actually a stink bug. So if you have this on your fruit tree, it can cause really bad tasting apples. I mean, that apple looks disgusting. And so here we have an invasive species called the brown marmorated stink bug, right? So want to prevent those. No good benefits of those stink bugs. And I did talk about there was that one beneficial one. It was that spine soldier beetle. I have not seen any record of that as of yet. If you guys find one, let me know. But we all got this one. Anyone want to call what this one was? Someone called it another common name. It's got that wheel right here. It's the assassin bug. Assassin bug. We love the assassin bug. Someone else called it the ambush bug as well. So very beneficial in our garden. Nymph stage here might look a little different. And I wish I could give you guys a vial through my computer here, but we're doing what we can here. So I'd like to show good examples of the larval, the nymph stage, and the adult stage. We had this one identified that we see a lot of times on goldenrod. Looks a lot like a lightning bug. It's our soldier beetle. We'll see a lot of these out there. This one eats a lot of our larvae on the ground. Again, this is, boots on the ground, eating up to 50 larvae, caterpillars, ground beetle. Very beneficial in our insect, in our gardens. Last guy right here, box elder bug. Just something to keep you guys on your toes here. We'll see these coming out here. Probably coming to the end. I saw a couple weeks ago when it was starting to warm up a little bit. Click beetles are very cool. They have a spring in their abdomen, and when they feel like they're in trouble, they'll spring away and can go up to 20 feet up in the air. Click beetles are cool. I do not think that they contribute any beneficial resources for us as gardeners. Parasitic wasp here. They come in all shapes and sizes. Again, we're looking for their signs in our garden. And my favorite, last one, contributes the most beneficial consumption of other pests are spiders. So take home, just determine if there's damage, what type of damage we have. You guys can distinguish between beneficial and pests, and we got to promote those beneficials. And so now that you guys have sat here with me and had a little conversation, hopefully you can bring these insect facts over to your other master gardeners and your peers and have a fun, enlightening conversation other than the coronavirus. So, let's talk about insects. Let's talk about something else, right? With that, I wanted to show you guys a few resources that I use, and we'll get to questions. And so I'm going to share something else. Can everyone see this screen right here? Just give me a thumbs up if you can.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. So this is PB 595. You can access this on our Tennessee publications, also uthort.com or .edu, excuse me. And so this has just about everything that we talked about as far as knowing what your host plant is and how to control it, right? So you can scroll through this and, it has examples of soil insects that you might see, or early season insects that you might see, thrips, aphids. Just something for you guys to be thinking about as you're going through the garden, and this probably has the answer for you. So great application for you guys to utilize. Another one is, if you actually need to look for spray recommendations. I know you guys asked, what spinosad was used for, and I'll scroll down here. Apple, peach, I think blueberries down here in a second. So spinosad, that's one of the ones that we use a lot of times for our spotted wing Drosophila. So this is also an excellent publication that I would recommend too. And this is PB 1622. One of the books I use a lot, if you guys can still see my screen, is this book by Whitney Cranshaw and David Shetler. I have this book on hand just about everywhere I go. And, if you can see the camera where awesome, color pictures here that we go through. This book is really cheap. I got this at McKay's for like maybe $5. Great resource to utilize. And if you want to get even further into what your garden insects you might have as well. And then the last thing, I actually just went and I wanted to see what was regularly available for, our folks that are going out and buying seeds. And this is one of the seeds that I saw available in one of the gardening areas in Knoxville here. And so this has a mixture. And I love that it has a mixture instead of just focusing on one flower, because that's really what our beneficial pollinators and insects need, is a mixture of what we can provide resources for, so we extend that bloom period for them. And so a lot of these are the ones that we talked about, cosmos, talked about asters, milkweed is iconic for a lot of our monarchs, coneflowers. So, getting a mixture, and I want that to take home for you guys, as to, what really works for you guys, and, what work in your garden and extending that bloom period. So hopefully I didn't talk y'all's ears off or you guys fall asleep on me or anything, but